Is Brother Sajid on?
Okay, let's go ahead and start. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wal aqibatu lil muttaqeen. والصلاة والسلام على رسوله النبي الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Alhamdulillah, last week we completed Allama Iqbal's Shikwa. We went through the entire thing. It was roughly 31 bongs and we got through it. We did a study of it, of what exactly is being said therein and what the concepts were. But to string our beats together, myself and Dr. Abdurrahman Abd are going to go ahead and try to give a summary and a conclusion as to what is to come. So, Dr. Saab, inshallah, I'll let you take it off.
Okay, I don't see Brother Sajid or Zafar Bhai still on. But anyway, I think it's time, so let's get started. MashaAllah, this was a very important kind of a step that we took some weeks ago when we started to study the message from Allama Iqbal, a poet from present-day Pakistan, but at the time when he was born, it was India. He was born in 1987.
Hello, Doctor, we can't see you.
Huh?
We can't see you.
You cannot see me? Okay, let me. Okay, here
okay,
you
there
go.
you go.
Okay, all right. Sorry about that.
We miss your robot.
Yeah. Okay. I was just saying that it was very appropriate that we talk about the message from Maulana Rumi and from Allama Iqbal that actually came from the basic teachings of Islam. We covered the Shikwa part, which is the 31 bands, 31 kind of couplets that contained basically the justification for Allama Iqbal to say what he said. And we took our time, actually, started with one or two bands every week, and then we increased a little bit afterwards. But basically, the point was to highlight the reason why Allama Iqbal, at a young age of 31, had the audacity or the courage to address Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the way he did. Now, prior to that, in the history of Islam, we don't read anything in literature that anybody had actually taken that kind of a monologue or dialogue with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that manner. And now a little bit of background on Allama Iqbal. He, like I said, was born in India at a time when Muslims were doubly oppressed. They were subjects to Indian kind of a majority population in that subcontinent of India. And then on top of that, the British were ruling India at the time. So you had one master in the shape of British government or British Raj. and the other servitude was under the majority of Hindu population that was indigenous to that area. They were the people that existed there, and they had the pride in knowing that they are the real inheritors of that land, and Muslims are invaders and outsiders and don't belong here and will be eventually thrown out. So that was the plight of Muslims at the time. On top of that, you have the beginnings of the destruction of Ottoman Empire on the world scene. If you recall, Ottomans at the time had taken the side of Germany against Europe, against Britain in the First World War. And that was brewing, and there were secret treaties that Ottomans had made with Germany at the time the war had not yet started. So now, being on the wrong side and the losing side, Muslims were losing their Ottoman Empire also, and Iqbal could see that because all of this was in the news in the 1900, let's say 8 and 9 and 10 at the time. Iqbal was just back from Europe after his higher studies and getting into the society in that day's central India, or which is now partly part of it is Pakistan. But he was active in the areas of Kashmir, Lahore, and up to Delhi. Now, a little bit background of Iqbal, born in the family of Brahmins from 3 generations. His great-great-grandfather, with 3 generations up, had converted to Islam. And his mother and father were very strict, practicing Muslims. So they basically raised him in a very Islamic way. And his stories are about his mother being very careful that she would not give him the best milk. Once she found out that that her husband, which is Iqbal's dad, had some kind of a business whereby the income may or may not be all halal. So she bought a goat or a cow. I think it was goat, and she started to use that milk to feed Iqbal. So she was that careful. He studies in Sialkot until his 12th grade, and then he goes to Lahore for 2 years, 2 or 3 years to do his BA and then MA, and then he goes to England, Oxford for a couple of years, and Germany, Munich for his PhD. And there he became fairly, apparently westernized, so to speak. He dressed like Western people, and he appreciated their education system and culture, and had several friends that were Europeans. And he talked about wine and meh and all that, which appeared as if he was endorsing it, although he was not. But in his discourse, the Western thoughts were fairly rampant. And he had studied Nietzsche and Bergson and other philosophers while he was in Germany doing his PhD in philosophy, which, by the theme was the Ajami, some kind of a jurisprudence in at the metaphysics or whatever. And he came to India when he came back in his late 20s to settle down. And he was going through a turmoil. Rampant at the time in the poetic circles was Persian. Persian was the language of the elite. And initial thoughts that used to come to him were in Persian. But obviously, being in India, the demand was of Hindi or Urdu. So he started to write poetry, started it in late 1900s, 1998 or 97, somewhere when he was still in college. But of course, at those days, the messages did not get across like they do now through YouTube and Facebook and all. So he was not well known except in the areas where he was living around Lahore. When he came back from England, and now he's in his early 30s. That's when he found himself in the movement for a independence of India, that he had to participate in Anjuman-e-Himayat Islam and Muslim Conference and other organizations were coming up. So there he used his vehicle of poetry to give his message. And that's when Shikwa came out in 1909. He wrote that and recited that in one of the big gatherings, and that was liked very much. Now I will take the next paragraph here and talk about Shikwa. When he wrote in 1909, he did not publish it anywhere, except the few people that may have seen it. But when he recited it in 1911, then that became kind of a news for that time. And lots of Islamic scholars who were not really well-rounded in world politics or a broader concept of appeal of Islam took the words literally and were very unhappy with the language and the manner in which Iqbal addressed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the title that he gave as a shikwa, again, did not help. So there was in the press for several months after that, negative kind of a coverage for Iqbal being disrespectful to the divine and not having enough manners. And don't forget, he was not necessarily somebody that represented the mainstream Muslim population at the time, because he appeared as if he was more under the influence of the West and the philosophy of the West and all that. So he did not have many friends or helpers in higher status of literature to be able to quell this immediately. And that rumbling lasted for a couple of years. And then in 1913, he came out and published his Jawab-e-Shikwa. And we will study the Jawab-e-Shikwa in the next several weeks. In that, he kind of not only answered all the questions that he had asked from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but he gave the reasoning of the downfall of Muslims and why this happened to them. Now, to just give you, Nihal, just give me 2 more minutes to give a color flavoring of what his shikwa was. I have just chosen 4 lines so that we can at least grasp what the shikwa was. So he says, "Eh Khuda shikwa ya arbab wafa bhi sun le, hu gare hum se thoda sa gila bhi sun le." So when he wanted to give the shikwa, he basically said that, "Oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, listen to a little bit of a complaint from those that are really habituated or are habitual of actually always praising you and always were on your side. But listen a little bit from them of a complaint that they have." And then he gave the justification for that. He said, "Tujhko maloom hai leta tha koi naam tera, Quwwat-e bazu Muslim ne kiya kaam tera." Do you remember that, there were not many people that would really remembering you like we did. And it was our strength, our efforts, our struggle that actually had done the work. And the work basically was that your oneness, Tawheed, had been corrupted by the people of the book as well as those that did not have any message. And nobody really knew about you the way we do. And your oneness was like a flower, and it had a fragrance that could not have spread unless there was a breeze that we served as. We were that kind of a breeze that took that message of your oneness and spread it across the globe. And then he said, "Rahmate hain teri aghyar ke kashanu par, barf girti hai to bechare musalmanon par." He says, "Your mercy and your kindness is on the shoulders of others. And if there is a lightning that falls upon anybody, that happens to be on poor Muslims. So why is it that we have been destroyed? Why is it been that we have been beaten up in Balkans and we are under servitude here in India and everywhere else at the time? The Muslims in Spain were also being persecuted here and there individually at that time, although the total annihilation of Muslims from Spain occurred after that during the several months, years that followed on that. And then let's take the last one that I picked for this. He says, मुश्किल उम्मत मरहूम की आसान कर दे और मोरे बेमाया को हमदोश सुलेमा कर दे, हिंद के दैर नशीनों को मुसलमान कर दे. Then his request basically was that make our difficulties go away. We are in India sitting along the people that do not believe in God. Make us back into true believers that we used to be. So in putting all these things together in these 31 bandhs, each bandh is 6 lines, by the way. So he was saying that ek bulbul hai ki hai main tarannum ab tak, iske seene mein hai nagmon ka talatam ab tak. He says, I'm the only one. One nightingale is still sitting in that garden, continuing to sing the same kind of song about praising you. And I have seene mein hai nagmon ka talatam ab tak, within my inside, inside my chest, abounds those songs that are dying to come out. We really want to be able to give the message of Islam to the world just like we did before, but our capacity to do so has been taken away from us. And all of this can be reversed by you. You have the power and the authority and the ability to give us back. And we are making a strong case that we are deserving. We have not forgotten you. We are the people that did your work before, and we are willing and ready to do that. And we want that favor from you one more time. Basically, that in a nutshell. Thing to remember is that he's still young. He's 31 years old when he says that. And he's not well established in that part of India yet. And he dares to say this. And this really catapults him after Jawab-e-Shikwa into the real front line of Muslim leadership. And the 2 decades that followed, let's say from 1913 to 31, that is when he actually did the struggle in the Muslim movement within India against Britishers, and then last couple of years simultaneously against the Indian hierarchy also, Hindu hierarchy, I should say, so that he was able to give the idea of independent Pakistan to Jinnah came, and with their struggle, a country came into being named Pakistan for Muslims. So that in a nutshell is the history, or a little summary of what Shikwa and its background was. If there is a time, I can answer any or clarify any of the points that I may have confused. I oversimplified it for everyone, but I think that suffices for us to know. If we and our children know that there was somebody like Iqbal, and that's what he said and did, and what was his role in creation of Pakistan, and how his literature is world-class literature. His poetry, if one knows Persian and Urdu, it's classic. In Iran, this is much more popular than it is in India and Pakistan now, because Iran, of course, with the Persian language being their original language, they know the diction used by Iqbal, and the poetic form that he used is still par excellent and not really surpassed by anybody. Rumi, Hali, and Razi, and Ghazali did Persian work, but their struggles were basically spiritualistic and Islamic. For Iqbal, the challenge was that he had to be political, he had to be scientific, he had to be reasonable, and yet to be spiritual. And there was a certain expectation of spiritual and Muslim leaders, like having a beard and having, tahajjud regularly and all that, and being somebody that has done Hajj or Umrah and all. And Iqbal had none of these. And yet he had to make his mark as a Muslim leader, and he, I think, did so successfully. I'll stop here.
अबद सलाम अलैकुम।
वालेकुम अस्सलाम।
मैं मुफीज बोल रहा हूँ
जी
जी। और मेरा सवाल ये है कि इकबाल, I've heard that Iqbal always said that Rumi is a spiritual guide.
Yes.
Is that true? And how much influence Rumi had on Iqbal's thought process?
That's a PhD question. If you read spiritual literature that is not necessarily prevalent in public, you would find that actually he met Rumi. Rumi actually came to him and asked him to write Masnavi. And that's when he wrote. Now, these things are difficult for us to comprehend, but there are several recorded kind of events whereby we know that Iqbal had taken Rumi as his teacher and a master and a guide. And he was doing a lot of work basically under spiritual guidance of Maulana Rum. Now, Iqbal makes no secret of this from very beginning of times, that Rumi is his murshid. And he's the one that has kindled a light in his chest that has brought him to the forefront to talk about Islam. Now, obviously, we know there are examples like this in the literature prior to that also, but none of that really authentic and recorded like this one is. Independently, it has been proven that Iqbal did have a linkage with Maulana Rumi in terms of guidance. So I don't know how else one can say, because there are hundreds of years of difference in their lifetimes. Rumi had been gone for centuries before Iqbal was born. So,
thank you. Thank you very much.
Mufiz Chauhan Sahab, mashallah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Very good. I see that. Yes. Good to see you.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Saab, it's one thing that always bothers me. We have a tradition, especially the Islamic tradition, where agar koi bhi khair ki baat aayi hai, like if somebody has some advice to offer, somebody has something to say, that they should be in a state where the listener should listen and take the advice for what it is. So like something I was thinking about is somebody like Umar radiallahu anh, right? This very the personality that we had was a very harsh personality, but if somebody was to come to him and say something to him, he would take his advice for what it is. But one thing, as somebody that works with the Muslim community, the one thing that always bothers me is religious gatekeeping, that I always say. That as if that the only people that are left to keep Islam alive are people who are scholarly. Now, don't get me wrong. Yes, ulama have preserved the deen in many ways when things were failing. But this is not, we don't have something, we don't have rahbaniya in our faith, right? Where we only have monasticism, where you detach yourself from the world and the people that detach themselves are the ones who are going to preserve it. But I feel like the one thing that Iqbal did was he took the jo baat hoti hai aam aadmi ke andar, usne isi mein arz kiya hai, right? That this pain, these pangs that may be there, he, amongst the people, he's kind of tried to put it into words. And it brings me to one of his other couplets. कौम की इमामत, कौम क्या चीज है, कौमों की इमामत क्या है, क्या समझेंगे ये फकत दो रकात के इमाम. And that always is something that I'm thinking about, is that we as a community need to talk to each other as opposed to talk at each other. And I feel like what Allama Sahib was doing was in Shikwa, he was giving us a lot of real talk.
Exactly. Now, well, I think you brought up a good point, and at 1913 was the time when he came with Jawab-e-Shikwa, but what happened in 1915 when he came with the Falsafa-e-Khudi, and then the criticism that he received was amazing. And that's where this point comes in that you just mentioned, because the traditional Islamic scholars who are really at the time the representatives of practice of Islam were so ritualistic, and some of them not that broad-minded, that the criticism to him was significant. And only Sufia could understand what Iqbal really meant. Now, the point that you made about being accepting of everything and being very benevolent and all that, that's the Sufiya's tradition. Rumi would take anybody, people that were non-atheists and people that were non-Christians and Jews and all that, embrace them, and yet listen to them, smile at them, and treat them just as he did the believers and practicing believers. And that is because he had gone to a point where he had seen all these people as children of God, some presenting more challenges than others, some very easy to deal with because they are already believers, others that have to be converted slowly and they have to come back to their fitra, the deen of fitra, the Islam. So that is the Sufiya's tradition. Yes, you're right that the so-called religious scholars that we have sitting in the pulpits were not necessarily that broad-minded to accept that kind of a discourse that Iqbal was used to. But again, these roles are important. Every role is important. An ignorant, illiterate person sitting in the audience plays a certain part, giving a challenge. A half-educated Imam in a masjid has a certain challenge that he presents to the broader picture of Islam. And similarly, a person who, like Iqbal, I don't think it's a coincidence that he did not do Hajj. I don't think it's a coincidence that he did not grow a beard. I think all of this basically is the part that he had to play so that we have all kinds of variations within true, real believing Muslims. So for Islam, just putting a shalwar kameez is not necessary, nor is having a certain length of beard. Even if you have it, somebody will say this is too short, this is too long, should not be colored, this is not. All of that, these are the challenges that occur. But again, they're all important in their own right, and we have to look beyond that. I used to say, and this is my own examples that I give, that if we have to get to the center of a circle, imagine Washington, D.C. and the White House. Na'uzubillah, I'm not giving that example to something to follow. But if one has to go there, if there was let's use Kaaba. Okay, that's a good center of the earth. If we are trying to go there and we can only go there by being, say, 100 miles up in the sky, now we have to come down and land in Makkah. So as we go circle around, and the outer circles, you will see a whole lot of different kinds of birds and others flying with you. As you come into the inner circle, then circle, if a time comes when you become so benevolent and divine-like that you tolerate just about everything, and then you realize that all those things were different models and different roles given to you, but we are all going basically to the same point. So Sufia have actually traveled those outer circles that have gone very close, so they become much more accepting. But the people that are out there, like mullahs that are in the far out periphery, they go and call the azan, but mullah ki azan or mujahid ki azan or. You have to see that if somebody has to do it as a duty, the spirit that he has in him is one thing. I have got to do this, honey, I'll come back in a few minutes. Let me go call my azan, then I'll come back. That's a job for him. But somebody who has to do it, and if he calls azan and he's at the battlefield, the enemy will find out his location and he could be in danger. That azan is very difficult to call. So this is an perspective that everyone has, and we have to accept everything. Basically, not deny it, accept it, and learn from it, and move on.
Yeah. Alaikum Sarah, I see you're on. Nice to see you. Feel free to, contribute as needed. I think you're muted now.
What's up?
G.
One second, Sister Sarah was saying something.
Okay.
Sorry,
Okay.
Assalamualaikum. Naya Salam Mubarak to everyone. Looking forward to starting the Jawab Shikwa. Sorry I missed last week. I was actually in a Sira intensive, so inshallah. Starting off, today's my birthday too, so starting off the
Jawab.
Oh,
congratulations.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Jazakallah. All right.
Very good. Mufiz bhai.
जी मेरा जो एक सवाल भी है, कमेंट भी है इस पे कि इकबाल was not against mullah or Sufis, he was against hypocrisy, I think, mostly among them. जो उनका शेर है कि मुल्ला की शरीयत में फकत मस्ती है गुफ्तार, वो his relationship with the Peer Mir of governorship is well known. He's right to him, ask questions from him. But hypocrisy of the pseudo Sufis and pseudo mullah, that was he was against. What's your thoughts on that?
No, there are no pseudo Sufis or pseudo mullahs. Let me just clarify that to you. He believed in spirituality. He believed in tasawwuf. He believed in people with the awliya Allah and all that. Yes. He used mullah as a symbol of ritualistic, uneducated, illiterate Islamic so-called leaders that really did not grasp the spirit of Islam. So this was a symbolic kind of a title that he would use in his poetry to talk about the difference between knowing about Islam and just looking like a Muslim and not knowing the spirit of it. So he used that mullah's word. And by the way, prior to that, mullah was a respected kind of a title. But at a certain point, mullah became the antithesis of a spiritual Muslim. And that still is. Maulvi also was something used prior to that, and Maulvi was abandoned basically because it has basically same root as mullah. But these were the respected terms some time ago, and not anymore, because anytime you wanted to talk about people that don't know anything about Islam, but look like Muslims, and we have been shown the examples of some of the fighters somewhere up in the hilly areas where they really don't even know kalima properly. And yet, if you look at them, they have a beard, because if they don't have beard, they'll be killed. And that's the tradition in their community. But they don't know anything about Islam. So if one of them leads you in the prayers, that would be a mullah. So he uses that symbolically, but he obviously was a spiritualist and believed in awliya Allah, and he did have a peer himself. And Pir Rumi was his spiritual leader. Yes.
So there's a question actually from Sarah about, was Iqbal countering the Deobandi movement growing at that time? And then the second question was, did he come from a Shia background? I wanted to mention two things, and then I'll let Dr. Saab in. As for him countering the Deobandi movement, Sarah, I think what Dr. Saab just mentioned about, clerics and religious scholars, like what exactly was Iqbal's attitude towards them? You do see within the literature, as Dr. Saab said, it's like he was countering this double-edged sword of hypocrisy that existed. But there was actually a quote that I had found about what Allama Iqbal had said in regards to the madaris, right? Specifically at that time, the Deoband movement and whatnot. And he'd said, and I'm just going to read this quote. He said, "Let these madrasas be in this very condition. Let the children of poor Muslims read in these madrasas. Should these mullahs and dervishes not be there, do you know what will happen? What will happen what will happen is what I have seen with my own eyes. If the Muslims of India are deprived of the influence of these madrasas, it will happen exactly like it happened in Spain after 800 years of Muslim rule. Today, except the relics of the reigns of Granada and Qurtuba and Al-Hamra will remain, and no traces found there of Islam and the Islamic civilization. In India too, and this was crazy. In India too, save the Taj Mahal and the Red Fort of Delhi, no trace of Muslims' 800-year rule in their civilization will be available. And it's not a coincidence that now the current BJP government has been saying that the Taj Mahal is actually a construction of Hindu culture, right? They've been trying to say that. The Taj Mahal is actually a Hindu culture because anything in India is Hindu. And then the second point about Iqbal coming from a Shia background, I would assume because he has written on Karbala, he's written on the family of the Prophet. One blind eye that many times as people who may be Sunni may follow is they think that any recognition or reverence of the family of the Prophet ﷺ is a Shia thing, which is incorrect, right? This Sunni Shia political enmity that's been created is a very like post 1979 Iranian revolution product. The amount of enmity that exists often between the Sunni and Shia communities didn't really like actualize to that heavy extent. But I'll let Dr. Saab inshallah speak on those two questions.
I think you have done it. You have answered it very well. Let's not dwell on the divisions within Islam. At one point, even Iqbal was told that he's pro-Qadiani and all. Mm-hmm. But those were different times. And as Iqbal was learning and about the different kind of persuasions within Muslim broader family, he sympathized with anything good that came out from anywhere. So he was not into any sects, and he did not really put himself anywhere, except in the last several years, be close to his death, when obviously the decisions had to be made as to how his burial should be arranged and all that. Then then it became very clear that he's a Hanafi Sunni and believes in all these, shrines and all of that. But prior to that, yes, there were kind of some suggestions that he's pro-Shia and all that. But he's a lover of Ahl Bayt of Prophet Islam, and so is everybody else that I know. Any true Muslim, unless you love the Prophet, may Allah be pleased with him and his family, you're not really a true mu'min. So, sometimes people with very little knowledge, anybody talks nice about Maula Ali Sher Khuda and then is labeled as a Shia, and that's obviously the narrow-mindedness of people. But let's not discuss that. Iqbal had very little to do about division within Islam. His message in his entire poetry does not speak about sectarianism within Islam. He's really in a way, his message is very open and global, and it should appeal to any kind of a Muslim, regardless of what part of the globe you live in.
You know, it's funny. I actually had given a khutbah a couple of months back, and the line Sayyid bhi ho, Mirza bhi ho, Afghan bhi ho, you sabhi kuch ho, bata Musalman bhi ho. So I had given it a little bit of a different twist. I was like, tum Sufi bhi ho, Salafi bhi ho, Barelvi bhi ho, you sabhi kuch ho, batao Musalman bhi ho. Yeah.
Good one.
Diobandi bhi ho, Sunni bhi ho, Shia bhi ho, right? Hanafi bhi ho, Shafi. Like, and the thing is, all these different demarcations, it's kind of sad, very sad, that when somebody asks you like, or like sometimes somebody will say like a very awkward question, like, what is your aqidah, right? Aqidah kya hai tumhara? And I'm just like, Allah is one. I don't know how to answer that. But it's so sad that it's a profound statement to say you're just Muslim.
Yeah. Well, luckily sitting here, we are remote from that kind of a problem, because here it's so important basically to be a Muslim, and we are kind of in a way it's easy for us to be able to ignore those sectarianism. But can you imagine if you're living within a 3-mile radius area where you have grown there all the time, and there if you have to differentiate from each other, So you will have to find something, even within one family. Somebody will say, well, he's a pro cricket guy. I love football myself. So you have to find some way of distinguishing each other.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that we are really divided. That only means that within that kind of a area, you want to find some kind of a special identifying features. I wouldn't consider that to be that negative at all. I think we should not give it too much air. As long as we believe in oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the finality of our beloved prophet, other messages that come and teachings basically are depending on the depth of the cup you carry to contain the knowledge. And more zarf you have, ability to absorb the truth, more humble and more kind of appealing you become. So I think we as Muslims in America, North America, are fortunate that we can call just about anybody, and anybody that comes to our masjid can pray with us, and we can do the same in anybody else's masjid, and we really don't find any contradiction.
Yeah. And even so, like, let's say there are differences, it's okay, right?
Yeah,
you know, like, fine, Sunnis and Shias have theological differences and historical differences. All right. And
sitting on a dining table, somebody would like kheer, other will take halwa, somebody will take paratha. That doesn't make that you're different. That only means
as long as there's no kaleji, we're fine.
Everything is halal right there. Yeah. So these differences really are the ones that could make us strong. We can rise above rivalry of that kind of a sort and mislabeling people. And again, that is a mullagiri. That basically is not knowing the spirit of Islam and just
I just wanted to add. So there is a professor in San Diego of Turkish descent, and he extensively studied the reason for fall of Muslims. And so, you know, our common belief usually has been that it's the effect of the colonialism that, you know, led to the downfall of Islam and all. But he goes further back and he says in the initial, after the first 3 or 4 centuries, our imams became, you know, like Maulvis, you know, so we assigned people to do this job. Before that, 85% of imams or who would lead the prayers would be ordinary people like, you know, a professor or an engineer or a doctor or a businessman. And the result was that these people understood the problems of the community. And the second thing was that he said that once the Maulvis became the religious leaders, they were taken by the government of the time to speak their language and speak for them, so that the critical people who initially who would question the government or the ruler was lost. And once that got lost, he said, you know, we declined since then. And I know that Maulana Mashriqi, when he came to India and was made the undersecretary, he found very soon that many of the mullahs were on the payroll of the Britishers. So that's one of the reasons why there has been this feeling against Maulvi and that they sold their, what they're supposed to believe in.
Perfect. This was necessary. You brought a very good point. Exactly what the case is. Yes, I was not aware of that, brother, but what he said is makes sense.
Yeah, there's actually something else I wanted to bring in. And then afterwards, actually, Dr. I was going to ask if you can give a quick summary of the last 2 bongs of Shukwa after this. Certain people that had just missed it. But when I was reading about, many of us are familiar with Shah Waliullah Dahlawi, right?
Yes.
And Shah Waliullah Dahlawi lives from 1703 to 1763 or something. He's a scholar everyone should be aware of. Basically, the entire Islamic intellectual tradition sources itself back to Shah Waliullah, regardless of what sect you're a part of or whatever. But during that time period, Shah Waliullah Dahlawi existed and was writing individually. For those of you that don't know, Shah Waliullah Dahlawi had translated portions of the Quran into Farsi when Persian was the main lingua franca in India. And then his son translated it into Urdu, Shah Abdul Aziz. So they actually made their translation of the on something very accessible to the people. But at the same time, there was the Farangi Mahal Madrasa, which many of you may be familiar with. It was in Lucknow. And Maulana Abdul Hay Lucknowi existed at that time, and he was a great scholar. And he traces himself back to the Nadwi tradition, where I had studied at Nadwatul Ulama. But what's interesting is that Shah Waliullah Dahlawi existed at the same time as the Farangi Mahal Madrasa, which actually many of the Maulanas and Mullahs that were being trained by the Farangi Mahal Madrasa would go and work for the Mughal Empire, right? But there was a separate tradition of Shah Waliullah Dahlawi in which he wrote this magnum opus book called Hujjatullah al-Baligha, which is going over the natural sciences as they interact with the Islamic sciences. So there's actually, I actually have a copy of one of the books here. It's actually a translation by Marcia Hermanson. She's a professor actually at Loyola University in Chicago. So she actually translated it, a part of it, but it basically going over how the natural sciences interact with the religious sciences. And this was in the 1700s that Shah Waliullah was doing this, before there was heavy tensions between the British Empire and Hindustan. But it's interesting that as time progressed on, because of the governmental association of mullahs and maulvis with the government, that tradition had to be retraced, and then the Deoband movement and other Dars-e-Nizami madaris became independent benefactor schools. But that tradition was different than the Shah Waliullah tradition. And the Shah Waliullah tradition has made its way now into the madaris, and now they teach people that you need to understand not just your faith sciences, but you also need to understand the natural sciences. And he actually did, for somebody that was a scholar, work in epistemology, like how do we define things, like very, very intricate works that he had worked on. So I'd encourage everyone to read up on that. If you're also interested in reading about Islam in the South Asian continent, in India, I would recommend a woman. Her name is Barbara Metcalf. So she actually has also very heavily written about many of these issues. I don't think I have her books here anymore, but oh, this is another one that I recommend. Actually, I have a couple of them. Actually, I have all of them. So these are, this is the Ulama of Farangi Mahal. So this was another book by Francis Robinson. So he just goes over the Farangi Mahal tradition and how it sourced itself from the Dars-e-Nizami. And then this was a very good one, A Concise History of Modern India by Barbara Metcalf. So a lot of these books go over what some of those conflicts were that existed during that time in India and in Hindustan, and where these traditions of how we should study and teach Islam kind of came to fruition.
Very good. Can I just make a comment here, Brother
Yes.
Nihal? I want your great grandson sitting where you are right now and show me these books, and they be written and translated by Muslims, not European or English speaking people.
Yeah.
So that is the task ahead of us. In other words, you see, whenever we reach for literature in the back, all of this is given to us by people that really have very little spiritual kind of a standing to teach us. And that is the challenge that our generation has now, that our great children and grandchildren will, who knows, will probably be here since we did something that happened by us, economic reasons or whatever. And now in my Shikwa book also, I write an apology as I attribute it to my future generations. For no fault of theirs, we have put them here, planted them here. And we have to provide literature for them now. We have to make sure that our literature is translated for them. Now, coming back to the point that you made, all of that is natural. You see, when the things were getting more organized, you needed an imam that was designated imam and all that. And in there did lay these complications that people will take this literally and will give up everything else and do just that. And then they will have to listen to whosoever pays their salary. In Saudi Arabia, this is done to the perfection, but everywhere else also, you see traces of it, although there are some independent masajid and independent imams in many parts of the world. But again, we are coming full circle. Hopefully the message itself is strong enough that wherever a strong community resides, they will be able to make guidelines to make sure that the teachings of Islam come to them from people who can teach freely without having to worry about whose point of view they are pushing forward. Whatever your heart accepts, receives within Islam, you pass it on. That's good enough. If you bring people to Islam and give them the basics, even if you give peripherals that may not be very appealing to them, once they are in there, they can go ahead and research it and come to whatever truths that they accept. So for us, job is not that difficult. The challenge basically is to make sure that we keep doing what we are doing and be positive about our approach.
Right.
One caution I always do, and that is, like Brother Mufid asked me the question about Rumi being the teacher of Iqbal and did all of that, and I mentioned in passing that they had met. If something is unbelievable and it's told to you by people, just like in Quran, the story of that ant listening to Prophet Solomon alayhi salam's army coming and telling the other ants to get into the holes. Now the miracle to me is not that Sulaiman alayhi salam could understand the language. Miracle to me is that even ant could hear from such a distance and could talk and be able to guide. So many things that are otherwise unbelievable because they are in Quran. We have no question about those to be the truth. Similarly, in Islam, in spirituality, lots of things happen to individuals and people, and they are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We may or may not connect that, but we have to keep our mind open and do not deny it. Don't say that that cannot happen. Just because my mind cannot accept it, it's not true. It may be true. So just leave it at that so that we do not become people that only go with the tangible and not grasp the spirit of the spirituality.
Sounds good.
And also we should not forget the softness and the love with which we convey the message. You know, the Sufis are really good in that point. There was a Sufi, Baba Muhyiddin in Philadelphia, who was from Sri Lanka, did not know a word of English, but with his way that he loved the community and the children, there were about 400 families, and these were professors and rabbis and all very highly educated people who became his disciples. And after his death, they continue to meet and listen to his tapes that they made for him. So I think that is one of the aspects of our religion that we should not forget, that, you know, in the end, every time, when there was a Pharaoh or Namrud or any of those, it's the question of the right that always prevailed. So we need to keep not forgetting that in spite of all the problems that we have, we should stay on the course, is what I'm trying to say. Is
beautiful. Baba Muhyiddin is my neighbor here in Philadelphia, and they have oats every year.
Yes.
And people come from tri-state area and others, and they gather there and they do all kind of things and namaz and all that people do. If you see the library that they have created from his oral lectures, they have created books. They're selling it and spreading Islam, mashallah. And when you go there, they're all Europeans. Right. Only when for the Urs we go from New York, there are Desi people, but other than that, their followers in that masjid, they're all Europeans. Americans that are, whites that are Muslims.
And his book for children are especially very, very good.
Yeah, and they wrote it. And he did not even make a single attempt to learn English. Nothing. Right. He kept speaking in his Bangladeshi, and then people translated it. And mashallah, we have a nucleus here in East Coast that is amazing.
Yeah, that's true. So if it's okay, can we just go ahead and quickly finish a reading, because there's a few people that wanted to do it. We don't have to go into an in-depth sense of the ending of Shikwa, but if it's okay, Dr. Saab, we can do
Which one? Yeah, this one, Lutf Marne mein?
Yeah. Yeah.
This is 30 and 31, the last two. Lutf marne mein hai baki, na maza jeene mein. कुछ मजा है तो यही खून जिगर पीने में. कितने बेताब हैं जौहर मेरे आईने में, इस कदर जलवे तड़पते हैं मेरे सीने में. इस गुलिस्तान में मगर देखने वाले ही नहीं, दाग जो सीने में रखते हों वो लाले ही नहीं. Let me read the next one also and then I'll translate. चाक इस बुलबुल तन्हा की नवा से दिल हूं, जागने वाले इसी बांगे दरा से दिल हूं, यानी फिर जिंदा नए अहदे वफा से दिल हूं, फिर इसी बादाए देरीना के प्यासे दिल हूं. अजमी खुम है तो क्या, मैं तो हिजाजी है मेरी, नगमा हिंदी है तो क्या, लै तो हिजाजी है मेरी. Beautiful. Now coming to the previous one, लुत्फ मरने में है ना, बाकी ना मजा जीने में. There is no enjoyment in dying away, perishing, or continuing to live on. कुछ मजा है तो यूं ही खून जिगर पीने में. If I get some enjoyment, and that is only in just really fretting over what we are going through and just absorbing it and keeping it within ourselves. Just खून जिगर पीना means you know you are under difficult and distress, but you can't really do anything about it. You just swallow it. कितने बेताब हैं जौहर मेरे आईने में, in my mirror, within my heart, how many diamonds, how many pearls, how many jewels are actually restless, trying to come out. किस कदर जलवे तड़पते हैं मेरे सीने में, how many sceneries and visions that I have within my inner self that are trying to manifest, but they have no venue, no way of really coming out and exhibiting themselves as to what they are going through. He says, इस गुलिस्तान में, in this particular garden, देखने वाले ही नहीं, there is nobody to really see all of that. दाग जो सीने में रखते हों वो लाले ही नहीं. There are no such flowers that have eyes in the middle of their being. The lala is a flower that has something that looks like an eye in the middle of it, black kind of an area that has little white stuffs in it.
Yeah.
Looks like the pupil of an eye. So he says those kind of people that were perceptive of these things, that community is no longer really around me. Nobody is listening to me and nobody is really interested. He says, Chak is bulbul tanha ki nawa se dil. He says, I wish. Bulbul tanha is calling himself. I'm the lone nightingale that is continuing to make a case for Muslims. He says, Chak torn apart would be, that kind of a heart that would be torn apart by my sound of this single nightingale. I want those to be around. जागने वाले इसी बांगे दरा से दिल हूं. I want those hearts that would waken up when I make the call of the marching bells. When I want people to get up and move, those hearts should be around here. यानी फिर जिंदा नए ऐदे वफा से दिल हूं. In other words, he says, so that a new kind of an agreement and on a testament we should make with you, O Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and those hearts would waken up again and will become alive. फिर उसी बादाए देरीना के प्यासे दिल हूं. I want those people that were thirsty for that kind of a divine mixture that they were drinking before. I want that kind of a people, that kind of Muslims thirsty for the divine message one more time. Then he said that ajami khum hai to kya, if my glass that I'm holding, if it is from Ajam, non-Arab area, so what? मैं तो हिजाजी है मेरी. The wine in it is from Hijaz, from the Holy Land. और नगमा हिंदी है तो क्या? What if my song and the words in my song are actually Asian or Indian? लै तो हिजाजी है मेरी. The rhythm that I use and the kind of music that I create from those words, that is Hijazi. In other words, the spirit within my words is from Medina Sharif and Makkah, although I am living and abiding in an area that is non-Arab. So he is closing his complaint basically by saying that I may not be worthy. You may think that I'm an outsider, but quite frankly, I basically have that same message that our ancestors had, although I am far flung now from that Hijaz. And I wish that there will be people listening to me, and I wish that you, since you are the divine power, you can make that happen again. So do it so that we enjoy the same glory and same kind of a lifestyle that we had when you were kind to us and merciful to us.
Alhamdulillah. And hopefully we have the ability to embody what needs to be embodied as true Muslims. Jazakallah khair, everyone. This has, we just finished the shikwa. So from next week, we're going to be starting Jawab Shikwa, but I guess a lot of the attendees and whatnot have requested that we move the timing. So we're going to be moving the timing to 8:30 p.m. on Sundays. So I guess that's what everyone had decided on. So so from next week, we're not going to be meeting at this time, but instead we're going to be meeting at 8:30 p.m. On Sunday night. And we're going to go ahead and do the shikwa, the Jawab Shikwa from there, inshallah. And Dr. Saab, I believe you'll be joining us as well.
You talking about who?
Yeah, are you going to be joining us for the 8:30 in the evening?
Oh yeah, 8:30 is perfect for me. This thing was very difficult. This conflicts with my Natiya Mushaira.
Yeah.
It happens every other week. So hope now that conflict is gone, that will be fine. Sunday, wherever we go, we usually come back by Sunday night. Now nobody's going anywhere, but
right.
Sunday night is better. Jawab Shikwa, I just am warning everybody, is 10 times as strong and profound as Shikwa was.
I love Jawab Shikwa.
Be prepared. Do you have a minute?
Yeah.
Give a closing remark.
No, yeah, go ahead, Dr. Saab.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we were talking about, not throwing anything else that you can't understand. It was this man, is one of the ayat that I want to finish by, is friend, being friend of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It was this man that was thinking at the time of Isha prayer that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I am up in age now and I'm mature and this and that. And I know that you have so many friends of you that are in this world. I want to meet one of them. Can you be kind enough to introduce me to one? And I want to really see what they look like and what they do so I can benefit from their company and see that. And he sleeps like that and wakes up in the morning and he just does whatever he does. And he then was coming back from his Fajr prayer, and on the way back, the sun was up and the kids were playing in the street, and he saw some children playing football, kicking the ball from one side of the street to the other. There were several kids, 4 or 5 on this side, 2 3 on the other side. But there was one child sitting about 7 8 9 years old, sitting on the corner of the street against a wall. And he happened to look at him, and he didn't look in good condition, looked as if he was a little bit maybe hungry or not well. And he looked at his shoes, and he had one shoe that had the front of it missing and really did not have much of a sole on the shoe, and it's torn down and looked in bad shape. So he says, I sat down next to him just to watch the game and just talk to him a little bit. And I saw that the child wanted to play, but he really couldn't kick the ball because he didn't have the right shoe, and he wanted to play. So he goes up in there and he says that he looks bad. So I felt in my heart that I should buy him some shoes. So he goes to the market, which was nearby, and takes a pair of shoes approximate to his size. And he comes back, and then he sees the child and he says, will you please try these shoes? I bought them for you. I hope they fit you. And the kid was very happy. So he puts the shoes on, wears them, and they fit him. And he gets up and he's very happy and smiling. He jumps up and he goes down and he kicks the ball and he's very happy. Then he comes and buys, and then the man starts to go back to his home, and he's very happy that he was able to help this child. The child comes running, uncle, will you please stop for a minute? And he says, yes. He says, can you do me one favor? He says, anything for you, beta. He says, can you thank God and tell him, I thank you for sending me the shoes? And the man was surprised. He says, you could have done that, and why do you want me to thank God? He says, because I was sleeping last night and I told God, oh, you must have so many friends, oh Allah. Why can't you send one of your friends to give me the shoes? And there you were. You gave me the shoes, and you are a friend of God. This answered the question to the man also, that the friends of God are people that may not even realize you do the work of God. This man met himself and knew that he had done something for God, because that was the child's prayer and became a reality for him. A beautiful, beautiful kind of a story to learn from, that we all have that capacity and that ability to be a vehicle and be an instrument of God if we make that intention.
Sounds good, inshallah. Inshallah. So I look forward to seeing you all every week. Jazakallah khair, Dr. Saab, for being with us. Thank you to everyone else that's also been tuning in every week. This was a big feat that we had accomplished. We've been doing this since September, between the winter, between the summer, between cold weather, warm weather, COVID, no COVID, open masjid, closed masjid, online, in person. So alhamdulillah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept this effort from us and give us the ability to truly realize what our potential is and how we should be moving forward. But yeah, so up until Ramadan, the plan is to continue on with the Jawab al-Shikwa, and we'll see where things
Inshallah.
go. I personally love Jawab al-Shikwa. I actually first studied Jawab al-Shikwa before I studied Shikwa. And you're going to see why, because this is going to be the metaphorical Allah's response to Iqbal, right? Iqbal ne muqaddama bithaya, aur ab Allah is responding, right?
That's right. Yes.
So it's going to be fun, inshallah.
Thank you, Brother Nihal. Thank you for just doing a marvelous job keeping the group together and guiding us through this. Thank you so much.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum.